after a unanimous Defensive Player of the Year and an elite finals run, is Victor Wembanyama now a top 5 defender of all time? Now, let me be clear. I'm not talking about full resume. I'm talking about peak for peak, because I don't think he can really stand up resume-wise against someone like Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Dikembe Mutombo, Hakeem Olajuwon, even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's like 3rd for blocks as well. So what would Wemby have to do to break into the top 5? Because in no particular order, my top 5 is Bill Russell, Hakeem, Wilt Chamberlain, Ben Wallace, and Dikembe Mutombo. Those guys have multiple Defensive Player of the Years, apart from Wilt before the award was given out, and Bill Russell, but those guys would have stacked them up anyway. There's like 6 to 10 region where you could put any one of the players of like Draymond Green, Rudy Gobert, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Kawhi Leonard, Scottie Pippen, Dwight Howard. So any of those guys could then make up the next set of spots, and you kind of like to think, where does Wemby now fit in that, especially with the first unanimous Defensive Player of the Year and the elite postseason he just had. And I think for these comparisons to be fair, you have to judge the player relative to era, because you look at someone like Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, 20 to 25 rebounds a night, but you got to remember the field goal percentage was around 42%, and the pace of that era was much faster, so teams were taking more shots that weren't as good, and therefore more rebound chances. We go into the 90s era, zone defense wasn't allowed until 2001, and then you also had the 3-second defense violation, so you could also have bigs that could sit in the paint longer, so the defensive structures were different. And I would argue Wemby's biggest asset is his versatility. You saw him guard Brunson, even though he did struggle at times. He can take on small guards, he can obviously deal with big men, and he's arguably the best shot blocker of all time. Like, I think against Minnesota, he broke the record with 12 blocks, so the most in a single postseason game. One thing I will say though about defenses now, even though they can play zone defense, they actually have to cover more space in this pace and space era. Everyone can be everywhere. It's kind of like positionless and fluid basketball, so you can have guys on the corners knocking down threes, and you've got a lot more space to cover. But Wemby, he's such a great interior presence that he deters people on a higher rate than ever for the drive to the basket. So Wemby isn't really getting any stats for that. He's not getting the rebound, and he's deterring people from taking these supposed good shots in favor of contested threes or then passing it out and recycling possession on the play. Those aren't going to his box scores, but that's a huge defensive asset and presence he's having on the game. And I think it's also fair to say this is probably the hardest time to be a big man across all areas, the hardest time to be someone who defends the paint and the interior, because now teams are playing 5 out, they're shooting over 37 threes a game. Wemby's having to cover a lot more space, a lot faster. So in terms of talent and peak, Wemby's top 5, I think there's no doubt about that. But in terms of overall resume, like, I'd say he's probably around 10 to 12. Maybe he can sneak into the top 10, but I'd like to end it on, I wonder how many more seasons will it take for us to say, okay, now he's the consensus number 1. He is the greatest defensive player of all time.